I took so many of my skills that I have in the chemistry lab, and there's so much overlap between the two, and it definitely did help me on my journey through the 10th, having that experience that I did have to do it from a science background, because I got to be able to use all that accuracy and precision that I'm used to using in the lab in the bake-off tent to weigh out my things accurately and try and do really elaborate creations. Yeah, hopefully some of you did watch the bake-off before Christmas and saw that I got right the way through to the final, with the photo shown there on the right. And then on the left is me in the lab, which is where I'm based. And so I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Leicester. So that's my day-to-day job. And baking is a hobby which has now evolved into appearing on the bake-off. So that was an absolutely amazing experience. I just loved the whole process. And it was just such an amazing thing to be a part of. So starting on to the talk, I thought a really good way of showcasing this chemistry of chocolate talk and starting it off would actually be going through to one of the weeks that I did on Bake Off, which was week 4, which was chocolate week. And for this chocolate week, we had all the different challenges to do, but the showstopper for that week involved doing a chocolate celebration box. So I thought I'd put that on here because I used that bake for that week as an opportunity to try and showcase my love of chemistry in that bake. It was dedicated for the University of Leicester Chemistry Centenary, which is coming up next year. So it was that celebration chocolate box for the University of Leicester for chemistry. So you can see here that we've got some lovely structures on top, and I'm going to talk about some of those actually later on in the talk. And then we've got little cutouts on the panels of different equipment that you use in a chemistry lab, and it's all on a chemistry decorated board as well, and with a nice glass stand, which I shall talk about later as well. So the really lovely thing about this bake that I had to do, and actually for this talk, is that a huge part of it was actually was obviously using chocolate and doing chocolate tempering. The chocolate tempering is going to be a big part of the talk that I'm going to introduce later on. But to start off with, let's just go back to basics and learn about what's in chocolate, what makes it up. So what is chocolate? So chocolate, it's a complex mixture of compounds, but if you actually zoom in to see in its basic form what that microstructure we actually have, you'll see you've got sugar crystals in there, you've got some cocoa solids, you've got milk solids, and you've got cocoa butter, and all of these exist in there in different amounts. It's around about 20% cocoa solids, 20% milk solids, same with cocoa butter as well, actually, and then a lot of it is sugar. And it's that sea of cocoa butter that's actually really, really important in how the properties of chocolate actually is as it exists. And the cocoa butter is going to be a big part of this talk actually as we go through. And then along with these other 4 key things, there's all sorts of other flavor compounds and other components that are in the chocolate as well. It's actually been discovered that there's actually around 600 aroma compounds that together make up the scent of chocolate. So there's a lot of chemistry, there's a lot of compounds going on inside your bar of chocolate. So talking about the cocoa butter, which is the sea of yellow there that we have on that microstructure. Cocoa butter is a really big part of this talk. And if you zoom in on cocoa butter and you see what it actually comprises of, the cocoa butter contains lots of fats, and these exist as these triglycerides shown here. So you might have covered those in some of your science lessons actually. And these triglycerides are comprised of fatty acids, so these long tail fatty acids and glycerol, and they're all joined together via a ester bond. If I can get the pen to work, I might be able to laser points there, laser points. And you can see you've got the ester bond in your triglyceride there, and that's where you've linked your carboxylic acid of your fatty acids to your glycerol. And so these are what make up your cocoa butter. And so there's 3 different ones that make it up. You've got this palmitic acid, stearic acid, and oleic acid. And these you can either have, so in this triglyceride here, I've got one of each of them to make that up, but you can have these in all different amounts actually. And many chocolate manufacturers will actually play around using different amounts of each of these fatty acids to get the desired properties of their chocolate and desired ones for what they want to sell. And they'll also adjust different ones accordingly. And one of these ones, as you can see here, oleic acid, it sticks out a bit compared to the other 2 because it actually just has this double bond in here. And if you cover these in your lessons, you'll know that these are this is a double bond, an unsaturated hydrocarbon now. And that actually what that does is it results in you've got a bit of a kink now in this long chain. And it means that when all of these fat molecules are all stacked on top of each other, with that kink in it, they don't actually sit or pack together quite as well as the other ones. And as a result of that, that causes a lower melting point of the resulting cocoa butter. So that just gives you an insight as to how the different molecules that you would use there can actually alter the properties of your chocolate. So the cocoa butter is really, really important, especially for the chocolate tempering, which is what I'm going to be a big part of this talk. It's also a big part of bake-off. So let's go back. Let's cover this topic. What is chocolate tempering? So chocolate tempering, if anybody's watched the bake-off over the many years, you know this is one of those classic things that all the bakers get tasked with doing. And it's usually for doing some sort of elaborate showstopper where you've got to have stable chocolate. You can actually work with panels of it. And it has this really lovely glossy shine to it, and you can snap it, and it's really good for like construction. And that's what I had to do when I was in the bake-off tent. So what is tempering? Well, tempering actually refers to it's the heating and cooling of a material to obtain a particular texture or property. So, for example, this is chocolate. This is tempering chocolate, but you could also temper other things as well. Like, so you can get tempered metals, and you can temper metals as well to get different properties from those, whether you want certain durability or hardness of those. But in chocolate here, your untempered chocolate is what you tend to just buy from the supermarket. So it's often a softer chocolate. It's quite dull, and sometimes when you handle them, they'll melt quite easily in your hand. And when you try to snap them, they just often just bend, or they have a very, very soft, dull snap to them. But when you temper the chocolate by doing this heating and cooling process, and this is what you'll have seen in the bake-off tent, you end up with this really glossy, shiny chocolate like this, and it has a really lovely snap to it when you go to break it, and also when it then goes in, when you then go to eat that chocolate, it just melts in the mouth really, really lovely. So that's that chocolate tempering process. And I thought what I wanted to do today, I wanted to showcase to you some of the science or chemistry behind what's happening when we transform this chocolate into the tempered chocolate. And I thought one of the things I could mention just now, actually, so you see on the left, sometimes you might get chocolate and you might have left it out in the sun a little bit, or it's just got a little bit warm. When you get it out of the packet, sometimes you see these little speckles on them, and this is called a sugar bloom when this happens. And that's because if you have quite high humidity, what happens is moisture can then condense on the surface of the chocolate, and then what happens is then the sugar that's in this chocolate, it's extracted out onto the surface of the chocolate, and then it will recrystallize, and that's how you get this sort of this white opaque finish on some chocolate that you get. But on to the tempering process. So to talk about this, the best thing to do now is to delve right into looking at the crystalline structures of the chocolate, because that's going to really help explain this process. So chocolate actually has 6 different crystalline forms, or these are also known as polymorphs. And I've just depicted these here in cartoon form, the 6 different types. And when I'm referring to the crystalline structure here, this is referring back to that cocoa butter that I showed you a couple of slides ago. So that cocoa butter, we have those triglycerides, these fats, and these all stack together. And then these make up an overall sort of like crystalline structure. And so that is what is we're talking about here when we're talking about this crystalline structure in your chocolate. So while chocolate isn't obviously crystalline itself, it's got millions of these microscopic crystals of the cocoa butter inside. They're too small for you to see, but they are mixed in with the other ingredients in your chocolate. But it's that crystalline structure of your cocoa butter which is really important here. And what happens is, in your starting chocolate, the standard chocolate that you would buy from the supermarket, you're going to have a mixture of all these different crystals in it. So you can see mixtures of type 1 through to type 6, these different crystalline forms, that you're going to have a right mixture of those in your chocolate. And what we want to do is, when we do the tempering process, by heating and by cooling, we're going to transform all of this into this. And type 5 is the crystalline form that you really want for your shiny tempered chocolate. And I'll tell you why in a couple of slides time when I talk about the different properties of the different types of crystals. But when we do tempering, we're taking this shop bought chocolate with all the different crystalline forms in, we're going to heat them all up so they melt, and then we're going to try and solidify them again or crystallize them out so we get just the type 5 crystals, and that's what we get with this really shiny chocolate. And that's going to be really nice and shiny. It's going to have a lovely snap to it, and it's going to melt in the mouth. So if we're looking to a little bit more details of these, so we've got those 6 crystalline forms. Put them here now going 1 to 6 going down, and I've included the melting point. And you can see here that as you go from crystalline form 1 down to 6, you can see the melting point is increasing. And that's because as we're going down, these molecules are going to be a bit more organized. They're going to be better packed together. When they're in these crystal forms, they're going to be better packed together. So therefore, they're going to be harder to melt. And that's where the melting point increases. So there's more organization in there. So they increase. And as a result of that, so we've got increased stability and increased density of this chocolate. Because these molecules, they're better packed together, they're going to be more dense. And as they've got increased density, that's what makes them harder to melt. And as a result of that, this is some of the sort of like standard properties that we can now assign to these different crystal forms. So 1 and 2, they melt quite a low temperature. They're quite a soft and crumbly chocolate. So if you had just crystal forms 1 and 2 to make it good chocolate. As we go to 3 and 4, you'll see that the melting point is a little bit higher. So these are much firmer chocolates now. So room temperature, we always know, is around about 20, 22 degrees. So we know that 25 and 27 are going to be fairly firm because they're not going to have melted at room temperature. But the snaps, it's quite a soft snap. It's not quite what we want. But when you get to this one here, which is type 5, this is the perfect one. So it's lovely and shiny. You can handle it really well, so you can use it for assembly, as I did for my chocolate box, and also it melts in the mouth. And it melts in the mouth because the melting point is actually quite close now to like body temperature. So that's why it just melts really nice. It just melts really nice and slowly in the mouth, which is why it has that lovely taste. So this is type 5, and that's the one that we want to get our tempered chocolate, which I showed on the previous slide. Now, type 6 as well, that you would think that would also be really good, but actually for type 6, that's actually a little bit too hard. So it doesn't, as it is so close now to the body temperature, it doesn't melt quite as well in the mouth, and it's really, really hard to it. It's probably a bit too firm to snap. So it's not got that right balance, but type 5 is the perfect one that we want. So on to the next slide. Now I'm going to talk you through the tempering process in terms of the heating and the cooling that we do, and then the specific temperatures that we need to reach in order to do that. So I'm going to show you it in graphical form here, and then on the next slide I've got a couple of videos of me actually in my kitchen doing it, so you can see with your own eyes actually what is happening here. So if we start right at the beginning, so this is the room temperature chocolate that I showed you on the other slide, and that's got a mixture of all the different crystal structures in there. So you can see those there, all the different coloured shapes that we've got. And then the first point to do, and then you'll have seen this time and time again if you watch Bake Off in the tent, is we'll either heat them in a microwave or usually over a pan of hot water, and we're going to melt all the chocolate. So we heat it up to 50 degrees or above, and that's going to melt all of those polymorphs, all of those crystal structures that I showed you on the previous slide. So they're all going to be melted now into one bowl. And the next process now is to cool them. And this is important this is the point where you want to bear in mind now those melting points that I showed you on the previous slide. So what we want to do is we want to cool it when we do this first cooling down to 27 degrees. And this is a temperature that is now below the melting point of type 5. So therefore we can now encourage them, those particular crystals, to grow. So if you remember on the other slide, types 1, 2, and 3 were all quite at much lower melting points, below 27 degrees. So if we cool it to 27, that temperature is going to be too high for those crystals to form. So this is why this is a perfect temperature. If we want to get down to 25, 27, this is a really good temperature now where we can just encourage just these type 5 crystals, these red pentagons that I've got here. And so we've got those, and they're just going to begin to grow. And once you reach that temperature, we then do a little bit of a warming period, just up to 30, and that heating up to 30 degrees is just really good now, because we're still below the melting point now of type 5, and we hold it at 30. And by holding it at 30, what happens is we can encourage now more of these crystals to form. So once you've got a few crystals forming, it then encourages more to form. And so that's what's happening at this point here. So we're getting more of these type 5 crystals to form together, and then eventually we get to a point where we can leave it now to set, and those crystals will just continue to grow, continue to crystallize out, and we get our perfectly tempered chocolate right at the end. So that's that tempering process. What we're doing is we've got that heating, we've got some cooling, and we've now, by doing that process, we've altered the actual physical properties now of our chocolate. We've gone from a soft chocolate with all these different crystal structures in, and it didn't snap very well. And at the end of this, we've now got a really nice shiny chocolate. It's got a really lovely snap to it. And in this process here, you'll often see when we do this cooling period down to 27, you'll often see on the chocolate here, you'll see they have those nice cool marble slabs. So those marble slabs are a really nice way of bringing that chocolate down to a cooler temperature nice and slowly, because you don't want to do it too fast. So you'll often see people use either a bowl of cold water and they'll sit their bowl in it, or they'll use a marble slab to help do the cooling process. So that's that tempering process in graphical form. And so what I'm going to do now is I've now hopefully got a few videos which I'm hoping will work, and it will show you what's happened, what happens in that process. So in these two videos, what I'm going to show you is I'm going to have done these first 3 or 4 steps. So I've melted my chocolate, I've cooled it back down, and then I've reheated it. I've made sure that I've got now just type 5 crystals, so I can now pour these out. Hopefully they're going to set and give me some nice tempered chocolate. So if I just try and play this video here, there we go. I was hoping I'd be able to skip the video a little bit, but you can see here, so what's happened is I've tempered the chocolate, and then now I'll just spread it out onto this surface, and then once I spread it out, I can leave it to set. So then if we go on to this next video now, you can see here that we have got our tempered chocolate, and it's got some sound on there. But anyway, I'll just do it without playing them. But you can see here we've got this nice shiny chocolate here, and it's set really nicely. So I poured it out on the left-hand video. Now on the right-hand video here, within just a few minutes, what happened is that chocolate just set straight away, set really nice and hard. And you can see it's got a lovely, nice sheen to that. And then when I try and then go and give it a little snap, it just snaps perfectly. And so that's what we had to do in the bake-off tent to use to make our chocolate panels. So that's that tempering process. And now I'm going to show you the result that I used when I used the tempering process in the bake-off tent again. So this was the chocolate box. And you can see now I've got it on the side photo as well now. And you can see here that I used different chemical elements to try and spell different words out on the side panels. So we've got baker there, we've got chocolate boxes, we've got cakes. I think on the other side, I did Alison's name as well using the chemical elements. So that was quite fun. And then so what I thought I'd do now is just sort of go through some of these structures that I included on my chocolate box and talk about where they featured in this bake. Most of them are coming from chocolate, but some of them also came from some of the other compounds that were within the ingredients that made up this bake. So to start off with, the first one on the top here is butyric acid. So butyric acid, this is a compound that is mainly found in American chocolate. It has got this very sort of very dairy, almost rancid taste to it. So if anybody's been abroad to America and you've tried American chocolate, sometimes you'll often notice it doesn't quite taste the same as our chocolate, and that's really because it's got that slight tang to it. This is often because it has this compound in, so this butyric acid. So it has this slight sweetish aftertaste. But that's the compound that is found within American chocolate. But actually, it is in all chocolate, but it's just in a higher amount to American chocolate. And the reason why they have it in slightly higher amounts is because it actually can help prolong the shelf life. So that's why that's included. And then another compound we've got, that's oleic acid. And I mentioned that on right at the start of the talk as well. So oleic acid is found both in the triglycerides that make up your cocoa butter, but it's also found in hazelnut oil, and I used hazelnuts. You can see them here. I used hazelnuts to make this bake here, so it was I had ground hazelnuts in the cake, and I also had some roasted ones on the top. And so this oleic acid, like I said earlier, so it's a nice long chain fatty acid, and it's an oil. It's an oil because it actually has a double bond. So when you have a double bond in there, I mentioned earlier about how having that kink prevents them from stacking all those molecules from linking together quite as well. And as a result, it therefore has a lower melting point, and so therefore oleic acid is one of those ones that's considered one of your healthy fats, because actually it exists as an oil at room temperature, whereas some of the other fats that I mentioned at the start of the talk will actually exist as a solid at room temperature. But oleic acid is an oil, which is why it's a healthy fat, and as a result of that, it's liquid room temperature. And so those sorts of fats, when you've eaten those, then they're less likely to clog up anywhere because they're going to just stay as an oil. So that's oleic acid, and then going cycling around, I've also piped on here sodium hydrogen carbonate, which is not in chocolate, but it is used all the time in baking. So you'll know this is your baking soda, and it's also in your baking powder as well. And that's what we need when we're making cakes to make them really nice and light and fluffy. So and it actually has like a two-pronged attack as well. So what you can actually do is when you're using this in your cooking, it's the release of the CO2 bubbles that's actually giving rise to the rising of your cake. And you can do that in two ways. So you can either heat it up, which is what we do when we put it in the oven. So we'll put them in the oven, and then that's going to break down this sodium hydrogen carbonate to release your CO2 and give the rise to your cake. But also acidity can also do it, as it is an alkaline, and it says that here. So and if you add an alkaline, it's alkaline. So if you add an acid to this alkaline, that will also release CO2, and that also helps to get the rise as well. So sometimes you might see recipes they might add a bit of lemon juice for something, for example. That's going to have a little bit of acidity in there, and that will also help to release the bubbles and release bubbles of CO2 and help with the rising of your cake. And actually, the difference between baking powder and bicarbonate of soda is the fact that the baking powder actually has a double action because it contains the acid. So if you have bicarbonate of soda, that's just going to contain this. And if you don't add any acidic element to your bake, you're really just going to create your CO2 bubbles when you heat it in the oven. But when you have baking powder, then it'll have a two-pronged attack, and you're going to it actually has this sodium hydrogen carbonate in your baking powder, but it's also got some potassium bicarbonate as well, called cream of tartar, and that is what the acid is, and that will react with this when you add some moisture or when it goes into a cake batter, it's going to be moist, and therefore that starts that reaction off, and so therefore you get bubbles that way as well. So that's obviously a really, really useful chemical compound that we use in all of our baking. And then on to the next one as we cycle around, we've got maltol. So maltol is a compound, and that's actually formed in your caramelization process. And that's in two ways. So first of all, you're going to get that when you are initially making your chocolate. So you've got sugar in chocolate. But when they roast cocoa beans, and in that roasting process, caramelization occurs, and that's going to release maltol. So there will be some of that in there. But also, you're going to I've heard of your caramelization when you're making caramel. Another one of those things that you always see in the bake-off tent is everyone making caramel. Often that you always see people going wrong because we're trying to make it a bit too quickly and we're rushing it. I remember there's quite a few instances in the most recent series where there was quite a few of us that had issues with making our caramel. It's always one of those things in the bake-off tent whereby we have caramel problems and we're having to remake them time and time again. But in that caramelization process, that's where compounds such as maltol and furan are going to be formed. And so what's happening in that process is you're starting off with your sugar. So when we do the caramel in the tent, you'll have your pan, you'll have your sugar in there, and that is sucrose. And then we're going to heat it up. It's really, really, really hot. And we don't touch it whilst we do that. We just leave it still. We heat it really, really high. And as we do that, that sugar is going to decompose. It first of all is going to decompose into glucose and fructose. And as we heat it even more, these molecules then also begin to decompose now, and that's producing that characteristic smell, taste, and colour that we get of caramel. So you see it turns out really golden colour. And that's where a lot of these aroma compounds are associated with the flavour that you get as well. So you get other compounds that are often associated that produce that colour that you get, but maltol is one of the ones that gives caramel that toasty flavour. You produce ethyl acetate, which gives it a fruity flavour, and then you've also got furan in there, which gives it the nutty flavour as well. But there's going to be a multitude of different compounds that are produced in that caramelization process, and it's that complex mixture of compounds all together, and that's what gives it that caramel, that really distinct, lovely taste that you get. So that's maltol. And then what else did I have on here? I think I've also put vanillin on here as well. Vanillin was a compound that I used in my cake mixture, and also I made some truffles as well on top because we were told to make different types of truffles. So I used some vanilla in my chocolate ganache in there. So vanillin is the main flavour compound, as you could imagine, in your vanilla. And there's around about 1 to 2% of it in your vanilla extract if you ever use vanilla extract in your baking. And what you might find sometimes when you go to the shops, you might see two different types of vanilla on the shelves. You might see a vanilla extract, and then you might also see a vanilla essence. And these are two very different things, because your vanilla extract is what's extracted from the natural vanillin. So that will be extracted from these vanilla pods. So you'll have seen these before multiple times, these long, thin black pods. So your vanilla extract is extracted from those, whereas when you see vanilla essence on the shelf, that actually contains synthetic vanillin. So actually that's where this vanillin compound here is synthetically made in a lab, and then that's then used to give you that to make the vanilla used in the vanilla essence itself. So if you see that on the shelf in the supermarket, I wouldn't recommend buying it because it does not taste as good as the actual proper extract. So always buy the vanilla extract. I would recommend, from my experience using it. It tastes a lot better than the synthetic version. So that's that. And then finally, I've got phenylethylamine on here as well. And this is a compound that notoriously for many, many, many years has always been referred to as either the chocolate amphetamine or the love drug. And that's because actually it is a neurotransmitter, and it's released in the brain, and it stimulates the brain's pleasure centers, and it gives that feeling of euphoria or that really good feel-good effect. And because it is associated with that and it is released in the brain, because phenylethylamine is also found in your chocolate, everybody therefore thinks that that's why chocolate is the compound. That's why chocolate is what everybody gives everybody on Valentine's Day, because it's known as it's always going to incite love, and it's got this love drug in it. But actually, that's not really the case, because the phenylethylamine that you actually have in your chocolate bar, although it is in there, it actually gets metabolized in your body long before it will get to the brain. So although in the brain it does make this compound, and it is associated with that really good feel-good effect, it's not actually the stuff that's in chocolate doesn't actually get there. So it's sort of like the love drug term is not really, but in association with your chocolate isn't really appropriate. But I think a lot of people still stick with it. But although phenylethylamine isn't a compound that is going to give you that feel-good effect per se, there are other compounds in your chocolate which you probably could associate to that. And these ones are theobromine and caffeine. So they're not on the chocolate box on the left, but these are both also found in your chocolate. Theobromine is definitely found in higher amounts. And caffeine, you do find in small amounts in chocolate. You'll find it more so in dark chocolate. And you'll see here they've got very, very similar structures. There's just one methyl group difference here on caffeine compared to theobromine. And these compounds are both stimulants. And so it's these compounds are more likely the reason as to why you get a bit of a buzz when you eat chocolate, because these are in there. And so that's why when you have your chocolate, you always want to go back for more, and you have that really good sort of like feel-good effect and a big buzz when you do have it. So that's just to highlight over a few of the compounds that I used that were in the bake that I did on the show. And you'll see, I think on the other slide, I had a beautiful glass stand that this was presented on, and that was made by the glass blower that we have here at the University of Leicester. So it was a really lovely bake to do. It was on a wooden board as well, and that came from the old teaching labs here at the university as well. So it had a really lovely story to it, this bake. It was an absolute joy to put together. And I thought, just before I finish, I thought what I would do is I would just give a little slide just to showcase some of those skills that I think were really, really transferable from my experience working in a chemistry lab and doing a chemistry degree, and how that really did help me in the bake-off tent, because there's so many of them where I think there's so much overlap between the two. I think you've got things such as being really, really organised. So I think if anybody watched me on the show, you'd have probably noticed I liked to be really, really prepared for a lot of the bakes that I was doing. So every time I went into the tent, I knew exactly what I was going to do. And I think that's definitely exactly the case in a chemistry lab as well. I always go into the lab knowing exactly what I'm going to do in the lab that day. I think problem solving as well. I think I'm used to doing quite a bit of that in the chemistry lab, because sometimes things go wrong, things aren't always perfect in the lab, and that's definitely the case as well in the bake-off tent as well. You always see there's lots of little problems that happen when something burns, or we drop something on the floor, or something breaks. So I think being able to problem solve and think on your feet is definitely another skill that I think, having learned it as part of my degree and a career in chemistry, really helped me in the tent. I think the same as coping under pressure, because again, lots of things going on in the lab. You've got your reactions going. You've also got some other admin work to do in the office and looking after students as well. So being able to juggle between doing lots of things was also really, really helpful in the tent, because we're always having to do a million things only in about a couple of hours that we're given. And yeah, so I think there's loads of other ones. Well, time management, another one. So I'm definitely used to that, being working in a chemistry lab environment, and time management is probably the number one thing in the bake-off tent, because you're restricted to so little time to do the bakes, and so that was really, really important as well. But yeah, there's so many other ones, and I think that also applies not even just in for the baking as well. There's a lot of these transferable skills are really, really applying lots of other things as well. And there's and as someone that likes to do lots of other hobbies and interests outside of my work, so like I do a lot of sports as well. There's a lot of skills there which helped as well in that case. So yeah, so I thought I'd just finish on a few of those sorts of things that are the transferable skills that I thought were really, really important to me during my time on the bake-off. And yeah, I think that's really about it. So that's the end of the talk. I hope you've learned a few new bits of chemistry about of what's in chocolate and how that tempering process happens. And now you've got a few facts you can go and tell your friends and family later today. So yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Josh. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, but I'll start with some of the questions that we received earlier as well. So we'll start off with some easy ones, maybe some about Bake Off. So what was your what was your favorite part of your Bake Off experience?
Oh, favorite part. I think when Paul and Prue gave you a really nice comment, that was really quite lovely. You got lots of lovely interactions with them as well, especially if you were at the front of the tent as well, and you saw Paul and Prue just as they walked into the tent. I remember for the week 9 show, I did a puff pastry dessert, and this really big grand one. And Prue walked in, I could see her face just light up when she walked into the tent. So that was one of the most special moments. That was definitely.
Amazing. Another question that we had early on was, what is studying chemistry-related courses at university like?
Oh, it's fantastic. I think chemistry and all the other related sciences, I think they're one of those degree courses whereby you get a lot of contact hours, there's a lot of time on campus. And I think for me, it was the practical element. I just absolutely loved being able to be in a lab and just be exposed to so much different variety of practicals as well. So whether that was for me as a chemist would have been a bit of practical organic chemistry, a bit of computational based stuff, or some of them on more the physical chemistry side of things. I just absolutely loved. I think loved being on campus in the lab and doing things. And I think the beauty of a lot of science courses as well is that they start off really broad, but then as you find your feet and you find the parts of that science that you really, really love, there's often options then to be able to sort of like choose your route as you go through the courses. As you go through the years. So I love to do organic chemistry, which is why you saw a lot of structures on my presentation just now. But as I went through my chemistry degree, I was able to sort of pick the courses that I was really interested in. So I think that's the beauty of the science courses really at university is you can sort of like pick your path as you go through. You can find bits that you like, and you've also got the opportunity to give something a go, see if you like it, and if it's not for you, then you know for next time I probably wouldn't try one like that again.
Amazing. Um, what was your hardest challenge chemistry-wise, but also baking-wise in the bake-off?
Oh, hardest challenge. Well, I'm having a bit of a challenge at the moment in the lab actually, because I've spent about 5 or 6 years on the same project. And I was very, very used to doing that. And now I've changed onto a different project. So I was having to sort of like reteach myself a lot of things that I've forgotten going a few years back. So that's a little bit. But apart from that, I did a PhD. So a PhD in general is pretty challenging. You have some fantastic days, you have some great highs, and you definitely have some big lows as well. And baking related, well, let's think in the bake-off tent actually. What was the trickiest one to do in there? Oh, I know, the meringue bomb. So if you watched week or was that week
Yeah.
6 or it was week 7, wasn't it? Week 7, we had to do a meringue bomb. That was the trickiest thing I've ever had to make. And all of the bakers that were in that week, when we arrived to see each other that weekend, were saying we were all just having all these stories of how bad the week had gone. Because if anybody that's made meringue before, you'll know that you have to bake it on a very low temperature for a very long period of time. But in a bake-off tent, you do not have a long period of time. So you've got to try and bake them quickly. And if you bake meringue quickly, it cracks and it crumbles. So you had to try and find different ways of reinforcing it. So a lot of that was adding a lot of icing sugar, and you made a much stiffer meringue. But yeah, that was tricky.
That actually moves nicely onto the next question, which is a very technical question about meringue. But in the process of egg foam formation to form meringue, why would proteins move through the liquid to the surface of the air bubbles to bond with each other and form a foamy network?
That's a tricky one, isn't it? I thought it was doing baking stuff.
Ah,
Well, when you're doing your meringue, so you're doing a lot of whisking, aren't you? So when you're whisking, what that can do, I think it can untangle a lot of the proteins that you've got in your egg white. And when they untangle, they can then begin to point in different directions. So often you're going to have like hydrophobic ends to your proteins and hydrophilic, and then they'll stick to the ones which they prefer. So your hydrophilic ends would go more towards like any aqueous or any water that you've got in your egg white, and then I think your hydrophobic ends, they'll all stick together. And it's usually when you have those hydrophobic ends, they tend to sort of like aggregate round air bubbles, and that's where that therefore adds that stability when you have your meringue. So as you're whisking it, you then get the hydrophobic bits, they'll form around these your air bubbles in there, so that when you've got your finished meringue, it just stays there and it's quite stable. And that's really helped as well with the addition of sugar. So as you add more sugar, you can get a more stiffer meringue. So that's why I was saying I added lots of icing sugar for the meringue bomb that I had to do, because I needed this structure to hold, because it's got to then bake. I just take it off a mold and onto something else. And I think that's what's going on in there. But I think that's the fascination I find, is when you have all these different egg substitutes and how those ones differ, the chemistry that's happening in there. Because you've got to try and replicate the same effect. You've got to try and get this suspension of lots of air bubbles to get that nice light meringue texture, but obviously you're doing it without an egg.
fantastic. So we've had, how did you manage to fit your passions alongside your work?
Very hard. I love to keep myself really busy, so I think that's why I managed to do it. I think when you find something you enjoy so much, then you always can find the time for it. And for me, I mentioned on the slide, baking is like a science. So I think that because there's so many overlaps between the two, that's why I think I love it so much, because I get just as much joy out of what I do in the lab as what I do in the kitchen. So and if you actually just look at them side by side, so in the lab I've got reagents that I put into a flask. In the kitchen, I've got ingredients that I'm putting into a mixing bowl. I'm still heating them both. So one I'm heating in a flask, one I'm putting in an oven. And you get a product at the end. Obviously, in the kitchen, I can eat that product, so that's better. But there's so many parallels with them all. The accurate weighing out and measuring of all the ingredients. And then you've got things like, so for certain reactions upstairs, I might use a catalyst. So I've got a really tiny amount of something, and that's just going to help just to really kickstart that reaction. But then when you're doing baking, sometimes it's going to be enzymes in there. So when you've got your yeast and you've only got a really tiny amount in there, but that tiny amount of yeast is enough then to really help plump up your bread that you're making. So I think it's those overlaps between the two, which I get really excited about. I love to try and balance the two. But throughout my whole research career, even as a PhD, I always have tried to and I always say to all my other students that I have as well, trying to maintain the work-life balance. I love to be in the lab and do the work, but then you've got to have your free time to go and do other stuff as well. Because those transferable skills that I mentioned, those things you can do a lot of those in your other hobbies, like your baking, or if you play a sport, or if you are playing in a band, do music, or if you're in a different club, like a guides club, or any sort of thing that you do, you can pick up all these skills, and you can develop them doing these other hobbies, and then you bring them into your work, and it just helps you be even better.
Amazing. What caused your love of baking?
I think I just always loved baking. I remember doing it from a very young age with my mum and my nan, so I've just always done it. I think it's the opportunity just to experiment, isn't it? Like you do in the lab, just try different flavors out, try different techniques out. So like there's pastry, but there's not just pastry, because you can do short crust pastry, you can do hot water pastry, you can do choux pastry, you can do phyllo pastry. And I think it's that wanting to try lots of different things. I think that's what really is why I love to do it. I just love to try things, to try new things, and that's what was the real joy of Bake Off, actually, because you had the license to just go absolutely mad, and you could do whatever you want. Because they gave us a little, like, each week they give us a little pot of money to go to practice. So I'm like, I've got free money here just to go and just try something that I've never done before. So on week 6 of the show, I did did some jelly art. On top of it, I did a hibiscus flower using some jelly art. I'd never done jelly art before, but it was like I just wanted to try something, and I thought to do the jelly art, you dissolve your gelatin, and then you set it, you pour it into a dish of some sort, let it chill and set, and then you will inject it with different coloured bits of more gelatin, and then you're just going to create an effect. And I thought, well, I'm a chemist. I spent all my life in a lab injecting things into flax. I'm used to injecting, therefore this should be my sort of thing, right? So I just love to try new things.
Great. Now, this is really going to show that I have nothing to do with science, but this is, why is theobromine called theobromine when it doesn't contain bromine?
That is a fantastic question. I'm pleased someone's asked it. So I know. So seeing the name, you'd think it's got to have bromine in it. I think it's because it's derived from the tree that the cocoa plant derived from. So cocoa plant in Latin, I think it's called Theobromus. So that's the name of the actual plant that your cocoa bean comes from. And therefore, as it's come from the Theobromus family of plants, it's called theobromine. But no, there is no bromine in it. Very good question. Because when I first saw the name, I thought, yeah, it's got to have a bromine in, right? But no, it's not.
What's the difference between butyric acid and butanoic acid?
I can't remember what it looked like now. I think it's just something that you can have different chemical names for different ones. Sometimes they have shorter format ones, so they roll off the tongue a bit better. But your IUPAC name would probably would be like that, butanoic acid.
Wait, as you're currently a researcher at the university, what are you looking forward to do in the future in food chemistry or chemistry in general?
Also a very good question. So what I'm hoping to do actually going forward, I'd like to sort of like do a little bit of both. So I'm going to keep my research that I do as one thing, and then the other side of things, I'm going to try and promote a bit more of the overlaps of science and baking, and try and just do talks like this actually to the younger generation. I say younger now because I'm feeling a bit old. And just try and showcase where chemistry is. Because chemistry is in absolutely everything that we do, and it underpins everything and all the other sciences as well. And so that's going to be my other part. So in the next few weeks, I'm going to be opening a science kitchen on campus here at the University of Leicester. And so from there, I'm going to be recording a lot of content to do talks like this, so we can sort of showcase some of the underlying science that is behind a lot of the baking techniques that we do. So look out for that, and yeah, that's coming up very soon.
Great. How would you recommend going about experimenting with recipes on limited resources, and how do you know if something will work out?
Yeah, I'm assuming that's baking related, yeah?
Yeah.
So I think the thing is with baking is that you can take the core ingredients with baking and you can make so much stuff. So as long as you've got, flour, sugar, salt, butter, eggs, the main few things, or milk, you can pretty much make everything. So you can really expand your repertoire of different baking disciplines just using those set things. So you don't need to go and buy anything fancy. So, for example, if you've made a bit of pastry before and you normally just do, I don't know, some sweet or savoury pastry tarts, but you could make shoe pastry. Shoe pastry, I know it's one of those things, and it was the same for me. Always frightened me. I think that's not going to work. I can't do shoe pastry. That's going to be too hard. But I knew I've done it more in the last few years, and I knew going on to Bake Off, I need to be able to do shoe pastry in case I get asked. So I made sure I was all right at it. But actually, it's really not that hard at all. It's really, you can make so many shoe buns out of one mixture. So you can just make a little bit in a pan, you just pipe everything, and you end up with hundreds and hundreds of them. So I think if you had limited resources, I would just have a go at, you can just use the core ingredients, and you can do them in all multitude of ways. And actually, how I love to bake, I bake with a lot of seasonal produce. So I get a lot of stuff off my garden, especially the fruits. And then I can take a fruit that's in season. So I'm getting that for free, and it's just coming off the garden. And then I can use that in all different types of baking. So whether I want to put it in a cake, or if I want to put it in a jam, or if I want to put it in a biscuit, or if I want to put it in a pie, I can actually do quite a lot of recipes, do quite a lot of baking with the same few ingredients, because the core ones don't change, and I'm just using one fruit but in 5 or 6 different ways. I think that's how I love to bake anyway.
Great. When you were a PhD student, what research did you do and how did you go about getting funding for it?
So I was a PhD student in chemical biology. So I did that because actually, as part of my master's undergraduate course, my 3rd year was spent in industry. So I was in industry. I worked at Signature Discovery at BioCity in Nottingham. Absolutely incredible placement year I did there. Definitely cemented my want to do organic chemistry. So I came back, and also during that year, I got to experience working in industry. But so I saw this multidisciplinary workforce where you had a medicinal chemistry sector, we had a biosciences sector, they had a computational. I loved to see all the different ones working together. So I wanted to do a PhD whereby I could try and do it, explore a bit of everything. And so the University of Leicester PhD project offered me that. So I was able to, I synthesized my molecules in the chemistry lab, and then I would take those over the road, and then I could do some in vitro testing on them to do some assays, but also then put them onto cancer cells, do all the treatments, and then do all the analysis, and then I could analyze the results. So I got to take compounds I got to design them, make them, test them, and evaluate them. So I think that's what I really wanted to do, and that's what the PhD offered here. The funding wise, I got a GTA funded PhD studentship, and that's a graduate teaching assistant, and they're relatively common, particularly in chemistry, because what they involve is they're a 4-year funded PhD project, but 20% of your time is spent teaching. So I would effectively be, over the course of a year, I'll be spending 4 days in the lab or doing my own research, and 1 day will be spent teaching in the undergraduate labs, all of the undergraduate students. And so that was it was a fantastic PhD, because I love to do teaching and talk to people and help people learn and develop. So it ticked all the boxes for me, because I got to do my research and I got to improve my experience as a teacher as well, looking after students in the lab.
What was your favorite technical challenge?
My favorite technical, I did actually quite like final. Because we walked into the tent, and we had I could see the proving draw was on, so I thought, I'm doing a bread here, and I really loved doing that, because I love to do bread, so that was really lovely, and it was lovely flavors as well. And actually, the semi-final was a really good one as well. But we had to do a apple frangipane tart. I love doing that. That's right up my street. That making pastry. Done loads of frangipans using apples. I have a lot of apples off the garden, so I'm used to doing those. So yeah, the last 2 actually that we did, although we're getting towards the end of the competition, I actually really enjoyed them because they're right up my street. Working with chocolate that's not my favourite thing really, because we don't eat a lot of it in my house. I do use a lot of fruits, so I don't use as much chocolate.
Great. What is something about chemistry in cooking or baking that you believe everyone should know?
Oh. Can you repeat that again? I mean, that's a tricky one.
What is something about chemistry in cooking or baking that you believe everyone should know?
Oh, I think actually the baking powder chat that that I mentioned earlier, that's a really important
Yeah.
thing to know because I think it's really lovely to understand fundamentally what's exactly happening, that compound that you're adding, you heat it and then that's releasing your skin, and that's what's got all your bubbles, and the fact that you had a two-pronged attack. And it's, I think it's when you first get introduced to science, you always get taught like, acid plus base, and you always get those reactions, and that's exactly what's happening just with your baking powder. Or even if you just got, your salt, sodium chloride is, another chemical compound. So I think just the way how, just simple chemical compounds are featured in all aspects of baking, I think that's just what I always just find fascinating, really.
Great. What would you say is the most rewarding thing about baking?
Again, to eat it at the end, that's quite rewarding. That's always the best. That was a big thing, and that was what was fantastic on Bake Off. So the question that everyone usually asks is, what happens to all the food? So what happens is the crew, as soon as they finish the judging, the crew just get in there and they eat everything. Not a single bit gets wasted. It all gets eaten. And so yeah, it's that's the bit that I love. That's why I love to bake. Really, I love to bake for people, so I can make a bake, take it to someone, and then we can all share and eat the food together. And it's just yeah, it's really good for sort of like networking and just a bit of a morale booster.
Great. What else is there? We had a couple of questions.
There's
So,
a few on the,
what
yeah,
do you
sorry,
encourage people? Yeah, had lots and lots. So, what do you encourage people to do when not all universities have the course that people want to study?
Um, so, well, which courses? I mean, I think most of them have got the core science, but I think one thing you definitely could explore is that often the university they'll offer these like combined degree courses when you've got like natural sciences. So then you've got the opportunity whereby you can do a year of that even, and then you can actually just think, oh, actually, well, I definitely prefer this bit, and then you can sort of like move on to a different course almost as part of that. And there's also looking to what some courses can offer courses in other disciplines as well. So I did chemistry, but I did pharmaceutical chemistry, so I got to have a go at attending a few of the courses with the biological sciences. So although I did all the pure chemistry, I got to understand a bit of like drug physiology and pharmacology, so how drugs work and how drugs work in the body. So I got to experience a course on a different degree course as part of my own one. So I think it's really good to have a look at what things are offered like that. So although you see it as you see it as this course, there might actually be within that opportunity to explore other ones as well. So yeah, so hopefully that's kind of answers it.
Yeah, just to add on to that, a lot of universities do have on each of their websites the modules that they will be doing for each of the courses. So if you are looking for something specific to do and study, then and they don't offer that specific course, if you look through the different modules from a similar course, you might just find a module within that would be what you want to study as well.
Yeah, and also is a lot of them are very a lot
Yeah.
of courses are quite broad at the start, and then you can pick. So, for example, the chemistry courses, the first year will be exactly the same for everybody. So I pretty much knew from the start I'm going to like organic chemistry, but I had a year or two where I got to explore a bit of every single science, every single bit of chemistry, and then as you go through the degree course, you can begin to specialise in your certain area. Very much like baking, actually, where you can start off by just doing a bit of everything, and you can find, okay, I'm a cake maker, I'm going to do cake. It's very similar.
Just had a question come in the chat, which was, how is filming Bake Off and are the mistakes really happening that often?
There's more mistakes than it's shown. It was amazing, really. There's so many cameras in the tent at any one time as well, so there's cameras everywhere. But you never have to look down, never have to look down a lens. They're always the cameras are filming there, and you're just working or just talking to somebody else. So there was never the pressure of having to try and perform in front of camera all the time. But yeah, there's lots of things that happen. I mean, they want to see mistakes, don't they? So, but if something goes wrong, you just think, well, I just want to bin that and then just start it again. But the camera crew, they want to see it go wrong. So if something's curdled, I'll go, oh, I'm going to repeat that. And they go, oh, what's that, Josh? Can I just stick the camera in there and have a look in the bowl? Can you tell me what's gone? I'm like, no, go away. I'm going to have to put it in the bin. I don't want you to see it. So there's definitely bits of that. But yeah, there's so much that goes on. And there's so much other really fun stuff that happens as well that you can't see. But, you know, especially those first couple of weeks, 12 bakers, so much going on in all the bakes, and they've got to condense the whole program down to an hour. So you're only going to just see little snippets.
Yep. Oh, who was your favorite contestant with you on Bake Off?
Don't think I can say that. I love them all. They're all absolutely brilliant. I got on well with everybody. Keith was fantastic. He was really good lad. It's a shame he was only in 2 weeks because I got on really well with him.
Yeah.
But you know, I love them all. Nikki and Saku were lovely. I've been and visited though. They both live Herefordshire way, so I've been and done family visits with my own family to visit their family. That'd be really lovely. But yeah, we all stay in touch. We've got a big group WhatsApp chat, so we stay in touch with everybody. And they did actually say, the production team, that it's one of the closest groups of bakers that they've ever had, really, because we all got on really, really well straight right from the get-go.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Okay, one final question, which is probably, in my opinion, the funniest question, but were you mesmerized by Paul's piercing blue eyes?
I was initially quite scared. I mean, you've always seen him on camera, you know, on your TV screens, and you think, oh, he's gonna be really, really harsh. He's gonna have that big evil stare. But actually, when you actually got in the tent, he's a bit of a child, really. He has a bit of a laugh. He'll have a laugh with us all. So he's not quite as scary as you've seen. He puts a little bit of it on, so it wasn't too bad. But yeah, it's a bit of a battle of that. I've got quite blue eyes as well, so they'll get mentioned in the battle of that as we went through. But yeah, no, it wasn't too bad. It was really, really good. I just loved them all. I thought, you know, Noel's fantastic. He's exactly as you see him. Just he's all over the place, and he's just a fantastic personality, and he's exactly like that in person as well. So he was brilliant.
Amazing. Well, that was all the questions. So thank you all for your time. Really appreciate you attending the event and listening in. And thank you for all the fantastic questions. Josh, do you have anything else to add?
No, I'm so pleased to have had so many questions. I love to answer questions. We could have just done a whole hour of that, I think, couldn't we? So yeah, no, absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I hope you loved the talk. I hope you've learned a little bit of chemistry, a bit of science behind your chocolate, and you've got a few little fun facts now that you can take away and go and tell people later today, and really impress them with all of your knowledge.
Amazing. Thank you so much, or you're free to leave now.